While bearing a different name, Prince of Persia Revelations is actually a port of Warrior Within with some added content. Or I guess restored content would be the correct term here, as from what I gathered, the new areas were originally intended for the console version, but were never finished and cut. And quite honestly, they should have stayed cut. These new areas are really considerable in size, but they do feel unfinished, as if it's still work-in-progress content. From gameplay side, there is very precious few permanent save points, haphazard enemy placement and encounters that just feel random and not balanced at all, challenges that are nothing like you will see in the rest of the game, so they come out of nowhere with no reason in, and the obstacles from the original game don't build upon them at all, and of course, this is Warrior Within, so there's a bunch of bugs. But also visually, these areas are really not impressive. There's only the most important objects without any flourish. Repetitive wall textures, ground is very blocky like the surface remains from white boxing, which it just might as well. It's very boring to look at even when there's lush greens. And let's not forget that there is a bunch of backtracking in Warrior Within. While there are shortcut paths that open up as you progress through these new locations, it's still even more areas you'll have to backtrack through in a game where that's already quite an issue for pacing and enjoyment. Then there's the performance. You might not encounter problems if you emulate the game on PC, since apparently it has unlocked frame rate, I guess? But on the actual PSP device, performance is pretty bad, rarely staying at 30 FPS, mostly jumping between 15 and 25. It can be pretty hard to see the environments because the dark palette wasn't adjusted for the screen, and that's exacerbated by the widescreen implementation. Warrior Within was made for a 4:3 screen ratio. Revelations makes the game widescreen by cutting off the top and bottom parts of the screen, parts that in the original game often showcase where you have to jump up or drop down, and those camera shots weren't adapted at all for the new screen ratio. Which means that unless you played the original and know what to expect, to simply understand what to do, you'll often have to employ the clunky but necessary PSP camera control implementation where you have to hold the left bumper while moving the stick. You might not even properly understand the story because the sound mix is absolutely messed up, in pre-rendered cutscenes especially. It's practically impossible to hear any dialogue in those. And while the console Warrior Within is the first Prince of Persia game to feature subtitles, which would help to alleviate the issue, Revelations doesn't have subtitles. In the end, this is certainly a playable enough variation of Warrior Within that will get a Stasocritic rating of 65. But I wouldn't recommend it over the original unless you're a really huge fan of Warrior Within who just really wants to have more of that game. If taking a look at these restored cut locations doesn't interest you, just play the original instead.